Most doctors won't say this at your appointment, but your body has already been warning you for months. The problem is, you've been reading the wrong signals. That strange waking at 3 a.m., you think it's stress. The swollen feet by evening, you blame the shoes. The cold hands, the foggy mornings, the sudden tiredness after eating. You've been calling these things aging. But what if none of them are random? After 60, your body doesn't get louder. It gets more precise. It stops shouting and starts whispering in patterns. And those patterns, when you know how to read them, tell you exactly what's shifting inside, often months before anything becomes serious. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 10 body signals that most people over 50 completely overlook, not because they're invisible, but because no one ever explained what they actually mean. By the end, you'll know which ones to monitor, which ones to act on immediately, and one that shows up in the middle of the night that almost everyone gets wrong. Let's start with the one that's happening right now, probably without you even noticing. When your body stops feeling quietly reliable. You wake up in the morning, sit at the edge of the bed, and for a brief moment something feels slightly different. Not painful or alarming, just a quiet sense that your body is not responding with the same ease it used to. Most people move past that feeling quickly and tell themselves it is just part of getting older, something expected and not worth thinking too much about. But that small moment, the one that seems insignificant, is often where the real story begins. Because the body rarely changes in loud ways at first, it starts by adjusting quietly in the background. And those quiet changes are usually the ones that matter most when you catch them early. After the age of 60, the body does not suddenly fail or decline all at once. Instead, it becomes slightly less efficient across different systems, like circulation, oxygen delivery, and muscle recovery. This means you may still do everything you used to do, but it feels just a little heavier, a little slower, a little less automatic. It is not weakness, and it is not laziness. It is simply how physiology adapts over time. Think of it less like something breaking, and more like a system that needs more support to produce the same result. And that shift in efficiency is often the first layer behind many symptoms people later notice. The difficulty is that these early signals do not interrupt your life strongly enough to demand attention. They blend into your routine, they feel familiar, and they are easy to dismiss as normal aging. That is where many people make a quiet mistake without realizing it. Because the body often whispers long before it ever speaks clearly, and when those whispers are ignored for too long, the message tends to come back louder later. So instead of asking, what is wrong? A better question is, what has changed compared to how you felt 6 months or a year ago? That comparison gives you a much clearer signal than focusing only on how you feel today. You can begin with simple observations like how your energy holds through the afternoon, or how your body responds when you stand up. Pay attention to patterns that repeat, not isolated moments that come and go. Because patterns are the language your body uses when it is trying to tell you something important. This is not about becoming anxious or hyper-aware of every sensation you feel. It is about building a calmer, more honest awareness of your own body over time. When you start recognizing small shifts without judgment, you gain more control over what happens next. And that awareness becomes powerful, because the next signs often seem unrelated at first. But once you see the pattern forming, everything begins to connect much more clearly. When tired no longer feels like a normal kind of tired. You sleep through the night, get up, wash your face, maybe even make your coffee the same way you always do, and yet your body already feels like it is working harder than it should. It is not the kind of tired that follows a busy day or poor sleep, because sometimes it shows up before the day has even really started. Many adults over 60 describe this as a strange heaviness, almost like the body is awake but not fully available. And because it is not dramatic, many people call it age, stress, or just a slower season of life. But persistent fatigue that does not match your rest is often one of the body's earliest quiet warnings. One reason this happens is that energy is not only about sleep. It also depends on how well oxygen, nutrients, blood flow, and recovery are working together behind the scenes. If any part of that system becomes less efficient, the body may still function, but it begins to spend more effort to produce the same result. That is why simple tasks can start to feel unusually costly, even when your schedule has not changed very much. It is a little like driving with the parking brake slightly engaged, because the car still moves, but everything takes more out of it. And after 60, that kind of hidden inefficiency becomes more common than most people realize. The important question is not whether you feel tired once in a while, because everyone does, but whether your fatigue feels different from the tiredness you used to know. Does it arrive earlier, last longer, or show up after activities that never used to drain you in this way? Do you feel less restored after sleep, or slower to recover after errands, chores, or even a short walk? A common mistake is assuming that if tiredness is common, it must be harmless. But when fatigue becomes a pattern instead of an occasional response, it may be pointing to something deeper that deserves attention. So start with a simple filter this week, and notice when your energy drops, what you were doing before it happened, and how long it takes for you to feel normal again. Pay attention to whether the fatigue is worst in the morning, after meals, in the late afternoon, or after light physical effort. That kind of pattern can be more useful than a vague statement like, "I have been feeling off lately." And do not only track how tired you feel, also notice whether you feel short of breath, mentally foggy, shaky, or unusually weak at the same time, because the combination around the fatigue often tells the clearer story. The good news is that this kind of signal is often easier to understand once you stop treating it like a personality problem or a motivation issue. This is not laziness, and it is not your body giving up. It may simply be your system asking for a closer look. Small patterns that repeat deserve more respect than big symptoms that happen once and disappear. And when tiredness starts becoming part of your normal day, it often opens the door to the next warning sign people tend to dismiss far too quickly. That next one often shows up in your hands and feet before it shows up anywhere else. When your hands and feet start feeling colder than they should, you are sitting in a warm room, the house feels comfortable, and yet your feet still feel cold against the floor, or your hands seem slower to warm up than everyone else's. Sometimes it shows up at night when you get into bed, and sometimes it appears in the morning when you first begin moving around the house. Because it is such a familiar sensation, many people treat it like a harmless personal quirk and stop thinking about it. But when cold hands or feet begin showing up more often, especially without a clear reason, the body may be revealing a circulation pattern that is becoming less efficient. And the reason this matters is that the extremities are often the first place where reduced flow quietly makes itself easier to notice. Your hands and feet sit at the far edges of the circulation system, so they are often the last places to receive strong, steady blood flow when the system is under strain. If blood vessels become less flexible, or if flow is not moving as smoothly as it once did, those outer areas can start feeling colder, slower, or slightly numb. That is why this symptom is not always about temperature alone, because sometimes it is really about delivery, meaning how well warmth, oxygen, and nutrients are reaching the tissue. A simple way to think about it is like water pressure at the end of a long pipe, because when pressure weakens, the farthest point feels it first. And after 60, that kind of quiet reduction can become more noticeable, even before a person feels anything stronger elsewhere. What makes this sign easy to miss is that it often arrives in small ways, such as mild tingling, pale fingertips, or a sense that your feet take longer to wake up when you start walking. Some people also notice that their toes look slightly different in color, or that their fingers feel stiff in ways they did not used to. The weak myth here is that if a symptom comes and goes, it must not mean much. But the signal behind the signal is repetition. Because when coldness keeps returning in the same pattern, the body is usually asking you to pay closer attention. And that is exactly why small, recurring signs deserve more respect than people often give them. So this week, notice when the coldness appears, whether it happens at rest or after sitting too long, and whether it improves quickly once you begin moving. Pay attention to tingling, numbness, color change, or a feeling that one side is noticeably different from the other. A practical test is to compare how your hands and feet feel in the same room at different times of day, rather than judging the symptom only once. If this is happening often, gentle walking, changing position more regularly, and avoiding long stretches of stillness can be a useful place to start. And if the coldness is persistent, worsening, or paired with pain or visible color changes, that is a smart moment to bring it up with a clinician. This may sound like a small thing, but small signs are often where body awareness becomes powerful, because they teach you how to notice patterns before they become harder to ignore. That is one reason conversations like this matter, since many people only start connecting these details after hearing them explained in plain language. The more clearly you read what your body is showing you, the easier it becomes to protect your energy, mobility, and independence with better timing. And once circulation starts leaving these little clues in the hands and feet, the next place it often reveals itself is during movement, when breathing suddenly feels different than it used to. That next shift can be subtle too, but it often changes how safe ordinary effort begins to feel. When breathing feels slightly harder during ordinary effort, you walk up a short set of stairs, carry a few grocery bags from the car, or move a little faster than usual, and suddenly you notice your breathing is heavier than it used to be. It is not always dramatic, and that is exactly why many people dismiss it, because they are still able to finish the task even if it feels less comfortable along the way. Sometimes the only sign is that you pause at the top of the stairs, or you slow down without really meaning to, just to let your breathing settle again. That quiet change matters, because when effort that once felt ordinary begins to ask more from your lungs and chest, the body may be revealing a deeper shift in how well it is keeping up. And in many older adults, that shift begins gradually enough that it gets mistaken for age long before it gets properly observed. Breathing during movement depends on coordination, not just on the lungs alone, because the heart, blood vessels, muscles, and oxygen delivery system all have to respond quickly when activity increases. If circulation is slower to adapt, or if the body is working harder to move oxygen where it needs to go, then even mild effort can start feeling more expensive than before. That is why the symptom is often not, "I cannot breathe," but rather, "Why did that take more out of me than it should have?" A useful way to picture it is like asking a small team to do a job faster without giving them more support. Because the work still gets done, but with more visible strain. And after 60, that extra strain can become one of the earliest clues that your body is compensating more than you realize. The key here is not whether you ever get winded, because anyone can after rushing or overdoing it, but whether your breathing feels unexpectedly heavy during tasks that used to feel manageable. Do you now avoid stairs more than before, walk more slowly without meaning to, or feel like you need recovery after very ordinary movement? One common mistake is assuming that if you can still complete the task, then the symptom must not mean much. But the signal behind the signal is change in tolerance, because a reduced comfort zone during effort can tell you a lot before more obvious symptoms ever appear. And that is why comparison to your own recent baseline matters much more than comparison to someone else. So start noticing what kinds of movement trigger heavier breathing, how quickly it settles, and whether it comes with chest tightness, unusual fatigue, dizziness, or a sense that your body is working too hard. A practical test is to pay attention during the same repeated task, like one flight of stairs, a short hill, or the walk from the parking lot to the store entrance. If the effort feels clearly different from what it felt like a few months ago, that is useful information and worth writing down, instead of just brushing off. For today, avoid pushing through the symptom aggressively, and for this week, choose steady movement, slower pacing, and honest observation rather than denial. And if shortness of breath is new, worsening, or paired with pressure in the chest, that deserves timely medical attention rather than guesswork. This is one of those signs that people often normalize for too long, because it arrives softly and still leaves them able to function. But functioning is not the same as thriving, and the body often shows loss of reserve before it shows true collapse. The earlier you notice that your breathing during effort has changed, the more wisely you can respond while there is still room to adjust calmly. And once the body starts revealing itself through breath, the next place it often shows the same story is lower down, especially by the end of the day, in the ankles and feet. That next sign can look harmless too, but it often says more about circulation than most people expect. When your ankles start swelling by the end of the day, you take off your shoes in the evening and notice the marks feel deeper than they used to, or your socks leave a line that lingers longer than expected. Maybe your ankles look slightly fuller, or your shoes feel tighter, even though nothing about your day seemed unusual. It often gets explained away as standing too long, or just normal fluid retention with age. But when swelling becomes a pattern, especially toward the end of the day, the body may be showing how well fluid is moving back through your system. And the ankles are often where that story becomes visible first. The circulation system does not only send blood forward, it also depends on an efficient return, especially from the lower parts of the body back toward the heart. Veins in the legs rely on small valves and muscle movement to push blood upward against gravity. When that return slows down, fluid can begin to settle in the lowest areas, which is why swelling often appears in the ankles and feet. A simple way to picture it is like water collecting at the bottom of a slope when flow is not strong enough to carry it back up. And after 60, that return system can gradually lose some of its efficiency without obvious warning at first. What makes this sign easy to overlook is that it often disappears overnight and then returns the next day, which makes people think it is temporary and harmless. But the real signal is not the swelling itself. It is the pattern of repetition and timing. Does it show up daily, even on lighter days, or seem to be getting slightly worse over time? A common assumption is that if swelling goes away after rest, it is not important. But recurring swelling, even if it resets each morning, can still reflect how your body is handling circulation and fluid balance. So begin by observing when the swelling appears, how far up the leg it goes, and how quickly it improves after elevating your feet or resting overnight. Press gently on the area and notice if the skin takes a moment to return to normal, which can give you a simple clue about fluid buildup. For this week, try alternating periods of sitting with short walks. Avoid staying in one position for too long, and elevate your legs for a few minutes during the day if needed. Use a simple Plan B, like flexing your ankles while seated or walking around the room every hour to support circulation. And if swelling becomes persistent, uneven between legs, or associated with discomfort or shortness of breath, it is worth discussing with a clinician. This is one of those signs that looks small, but reflects something systemic, not just local. The body rarely isolates a pattern like this without a broader reason behind it. And when you begin to notice how fluid moves, settles, and returns, you start understanding circulation in a much more practical way. Because the next signal often appears not in stillness, but in movement, especially when you change position too quickly. And that is where many people experience something brief but important that they often ignore. When standing up makes the room feel briefly unsteady. You get up from the bed, rise from the couch, or stand after sitting through a long meal, and for a second, the room feels slightly off, almost as if your body needs a moment to catch up. It may be a brief wave of lightheadedness, a dimming of vision, or just that strange feeling that you should hold still before taking the next step. Because it passes quickly, many people shrug it off and keep moving as if nothing important happened. But when that moment starts repeating, especially after ordinary position changes, it can be one of the clearest, quiet signs that circulation is not adjusting as smoothly as it should. And after 60, those few seconds can tell you more about the body's timing than most people realize. When you stand up, gravity suddenly pulls blood downward, and your body has to respond almost immediately by tightening vessels and helping blood reach the brain again. If that response is slower than it used to be, even by a small margin, you may feel a short dip before the system catches up. That is why the sensation often feels less like true vertigo and more like a brief lag between movement and stability. A simple way to picture it is like water pressure dropping for a moment when several taps turn on at once, because the system needs a second to rebalance. And with age, hydration, medications, circulation changes, and deconditioning can all make that adjustment a little slower. The detail that matters most is not whether it ever happens, because a rare, brief episode can occur for many reasons, but whether it happens often enough to become familiar. Do you pause before walking because you expect it now, or do you reach for furniture automatically without even thinking about it? A common mistake is to label it as nothing, simply because it is short. But the signal behind the signal is that your body may be losing some of its speed in managing blood pressure changes, and that can affect confidence, balance, and fall risk. So even a brief symptom deserves respect when it starts becoming part of your normal routine. A practical step for today is to slow the transition itself by sitting at the edge of the bed for a moment, planting your feet, and standing more deliberately instead of popping up quickly. For this week, notice whether it is worse in the morning, after meals, after warm showers, or on days when you have had less water than usual. Also pay attention to whether it comes with weakness, palpitations, or darkening vision, because those details make the pattern easier to understand. A simple plan B is to tighten your calf muscles or march gently in place before fully walking, especially if your body needs a second to stabilize. And if the episodes are frequent, worsening, or lead to near falls, that is a strong reason to bring it up with a clinician instead of normalizing it. What makes this topic so important is that it connects several earlier signs into one larger pattern, because energy, circulation, breathing, and fluid control do not really live in separate boxes. The body compensates quietly for a long time, and then it begins leaving clues during the most ordinary moments, like getting out of a chair or stepping away from the bed. That does not mean something terrible is happening, but it does mean your body may be asking for steadier support and more honest observation. And once you begin seeing those connections, the next sign becomes much easier to read because it shows up in the rhythm of the heart itself. Sometimes it lasts only seconds, but even then it can feel strangely hard to ignore. When your heartbeat suddenly feels different for a moment, you may be sitting quietly, folding laundry, watching television, or simply lying in bed, and out of nowhere your heart seems to beat harder, skip oddly, or flutter in a way that catches your attention. It can feel brief and strange, almost like one beat landed too strongly or arrived out of rhythm, and then, just as quickly, it passes. Because it ends so fast, many people try to forget it and move on, especially if it does not come with pain. But when your heartbeat starts feeling noticeably different, even for short moments, the body may be giving you another quiet clue about how its internal timing is changing. And this is one of those signs that feels deeply personal, because even a small change in rhythm can be hard to ignore once you notice it. The heart is not only a muscle, it is also an electrical system, which means its rhythm depends on signals firing in a coordinated way every second of the day. As we get older, that timing can become a little more sensitive to stress, dehydration, poor sleep, stimulants, medication changes, or shifts in circulation. That is why some palpitations are harmless and brief, while others deserve a closer look, depending on when they happen and what comes with them. A simple way to think about it is like a familiar song playing with one unexpected beat out of place. Because even if the music continues, your ear notices the difference immediately. And after 60, the body can become less forgiving of the small triggers that once passed without leaving much of a trace. What matters most is not just that the heartbeat feels different, but the context around it. Because that context often tells you whether it is likely to be mild or more worth investigating. Does it happen at rest, during movement, after caffeine, when you are overtired, or during moments when you also feel short of breath or lightheaded? A common mistake is to assume that anything brief cannot matter, or that anything noticeable must automatically be dangerous. But the signal behind the signal is pattern, because repeated fluttering, pounding, or irregular beats may reflect how your body is handling stress, fluid balance, blood flow, or electrical stability. And when a symptom repeats in the same kind of moment, it usually deserves more than a quick dismissal. So for now, do not panic when it happens, but do get curious in a calm and practical way by noticing when it appears, how long it lasts, and what you were doing right before it began. It helps to write down whether it felt like racing, pounding, skipping, or fluttering, because those small distinctions can make your observations much more useful later. For this week, reduce obvious triggers where you can, stay well hydrated, and pay attention to whether poor sleep or long periods without food seem to make it worse. A simple plan B is to sit down, breathe slowly, and let the moment pass without spiraling, while still taking note of what happened, instead of pretending it meant nothing. And if palpitations become frequent, prolonged, or come with chest discomfort, dizziness, faintness, or breathlessness, that is the right time to speak with a clinician. The reason this sign matters is that the heart often reveals stress through rhythm before it reveals it in louder ways. Your body is rarely trying to frighten you, but it may be asking you to slow down enough to recognize what has started to change. That kind of awareness becomes even more important because the next warning sign is one many people misunderstand completely, especially when it appears during movement rather than rest. And when that happens, people often wait too long because they expect heart-related symptoms to look far more dramatic than they usually do. In reality, one of the most important signs can feel much quieter, and that is exactly why it gets missed. When pressure or heaviness shows up in the chest during movement. You carry grocery bags from the car, walk a little faster to catch the light, or climb a short incline, and instead of feeling pain, you notice a mild pressure or heaviness in the center of the chest. It may not be sharp, and it may not stop you in your tracks, which is why so many people talk themselves out of taking it seriously. Sometimes it feels more like tightness, weight, or a strange awareness that your chest does not feel as open during effort as it should. That subtlety is exactly what makes this sign important, because many heart-related warnings arrive quietly and only show themselves when the body asks for more from circulation. And when a symptom appears with movement and eases with rest, the body is often giving you a pattern that deserves real respect. Your heart muscle needs a steady supply of oxygen-rich blood at all times, but during physical effort it needs even more, because the demand rises quickly. If the blood supply is reduced, or slower to keep up, the heart may still manage at rest, yet during movement it can begin sending a signal that feels like pressure rather than dramatic pain. That is why some people never experience the movie version of chest pain, and instead feel something much easier to rationalize away. A useful way to picture it is like asking an engine to climb a hill, with less fuel reaching it than it needs. because it may still move, but not comfortably. And after 60, this kind of effort-related signal becomes more relevant, because circulation reserve often changes long before people realize it. The biggest mistake here is waiting for the symptom to become severe before giving it meaning, because many important warnings are mild at the beginning. Ask yourself whether the sensation appears during walking, carrying, climbing, or emotional strain, and whether it settles when you stop and recover. Also notice whether it spreads into the shoulder, jaw, upper back, or arm, even if the chest feeling itself seems small. The signal behind the signal is not drama, it is consistency, because repeated pressure with effort often says more than one intense moment that never returns. And this is exactly the kind of quiet but important pattern that makes people value channels like this. Because once something is explained clearly, it becomes much harder to dismiss. So, for today, do not test this by pushing harder just to prove to yourself that it is nothing, because denial is not a useful form of reassurance. For this week, notice what level of effort brings it on, how long it lasts, and whether it always improves when you stop and rest. Keep the observation practical and simple, and do not pile on heavy meals, rushed movement, or unnecessary strain when the pattern is still unclear. A good plan B is to slow down, shorten the effort, and treat the symptom like information rather than something to argue with. And if chest pressure is new, recurrent, worsening, or comes with breathlessness, sweating, dizziness, or nausea, that is a clear reason to seek medical evaluation promptly. What makes this sign so easy to miss is that people often expect serious heart symptoms to be loud, dramatic, and unmistakable, when many are not. The body often asks politely before it demands attention, and mature health awareness means listening earlier, not later. You do not need panic to take a signal seriously. You only need enough honesty to notice when a pattern keeps repeating under the same conditions. And once the body starts speaking this way during the day, the next sign often shows up in a much more unsettling setting, in the middle of the night, when everything is supposed to be quiet. That is where many people wake up confused, not because of pain, but because breathing suddenly feels different in the dark. When you wake up in the night feeling short of breath, you wake up in the dark, not fully panicked, but unsettled, with the strange feeling that your breathing is not as easy as it should be. And for a moment you sit there, trying to understand what changed. Sometimes you shift upright on the edge of the bed and notice that within a minute or two, the feeling begins to ease, which makes it tempting to dismiss once the moment passes. Because there is no obvious injury, no loud event, and no clear explanation, many people file it away as anxiety, a bad dream, or simply sleeping in the wrong position. But when breathing feels different enough to wake you, especially more than once, the body may be showing you something that deserves more than a quick excuse. And nighttime symptoms matter because the body tends to reveal hidden strain when everything else is finally quiet. When you lie flat, fluid distribution, breathing mechanics, and circulation demands can shift in ways that feel small during the day, but become more noticeable at night. If the body is already working a little harder to manage fluid or oxygen delivery, lying down can sometimes make that hidden effort easier to feel. That is why some people wake feeling as if they need more air, only to improve once they sit up and give the system a different position to work with. A simple way to picture it is like a room that feels comfortable until one small change in airflow suddenly makes you aware of everything at once. And after 60, nighttime is often when quiet circulation patterns stop hiding so well. What matters most is not a single bad night, because sleep can be disrupted for many reasons, but a repeating pattern that begins to feel familiar in the same kind of way. Do you wake short of breath only when lying flat, or only after certain evenings, or with swelling in the ankles, heavier breathing during the day, or unusual fatigue? A common mistake is separating nighttime symptoms from daytime ones and treating each as unrelated. But the signal behind the signal is connection, because breath changes at night may belong to the same larger pattern you have already been feeling during movement, rest, or recovery. And once those dots connect, the body often becomes much easier to read. So for today, do not ignore the position itself, because it matters whether the feeling improves when you sit up, change sides, or elevate your head slightly. For this week, notice whether the episodes follow salty meals, long days of sitting, late evening exertion, or nights when your ankles seemed more swollen before bed. Write down how often it happens, how long it lasts, and whether coughing, wheezing, chest pressure, or rapid heartbeat comes with it. A practical plan B is to sleep slightly more elevated while you observe the pattern, but not to use position changes as a way to pretend the sign means nothing. And if nighttime breathlessness is new, recurrent, or worsening, that is a strong reason to seek medical guidance rather than waiting for it to become dramatic. The reason this sign unsettles people so much is that the night strips away distraction, and even a subtle shift in breathing can feel much louder when the house is silent. That discomfort should not automatically scare you, but it should invite honesty, because the body often becomes very clear when it runs out of easier ways to compensate. You do not need to jump to conclusions, only to respect a pattern when it starts repeating under the same conditions. And once sleep begins revealing what the body is struggling to manage, the next sign often appears in a very different place, not in the chest or breath, but in the bathroom and the color of your urine. That clue seems smaller on the surface, yet it can quietly tell you a great deal about hydration, kidneys, and circulation balance. When your urine starts looking darker or more concentrated than usual, you go to the bathroom in the morning, glance down without thinking much about it, and notice the color looks deeper, stronger, or more concentrated than what used to feel normal for you. Maybe it happens after a long night, maybe after a busy day, or maybe it is starting to show up often enough that you have quietly begun noticing the pattern. Because urine color seems like such a small detail, most people treat it as unimportant unless there is pain or a major change in frequency. But the body often reveals shifts in hydration, circulation balance, and kidney workload through very ordinary signs like this, long before people think to pay attention. And after 60, those everyday details can become much more useful than they first appear. Your kidneys are constantly filtering blood, balancing fluid, and helping regulate what stays in the body and what gets removed. When you are a bit dehydrated, when fluid intake drops, or when the body is working harder to hold on to water, urine often becomes darker because it is more concentrated. That does not always mean something serious is happening, but it does mean the body is giving you information about how well it is managing fluid balance. A simple way to think about it is like making coffee with less water, because the same basic contents become noticeably stronger and easier to see. And in older adults, thirst signals may become less reliable, which makes this kind of quiet clue much easier to miss. What matters most is the pattern around the color, not just one isolated moment, because morning urine can naturally be darker after a full night of sleep. The better question is whether darker urine is showing up often during the day, even when your intake seems reasonable, or whether it comes with swelling, fatigue, dizziness, or reduced urination. A common mistake is assuming that as long as you are drinking something, hydration must be fine. But the signal behind the signal is balance, because the body may still be undersupported if intake, salt, medications, heat, or circulation changes are quietly shifting the equation. And once you begin noticing those surrounding details, the meaning of the symptom becomes much easier to read. So for today, simply start paying attention without overreacting, and compare what you see across different times of day, rather than judging it from a single bathroom trip. For this week, notice whether urine stays dark despite regular fluids, whether you feel thirsty less often than you used to, and whether your energy improves when hydration improves. A practical plan A is to spread fluid intake more evenly through the day, instead of trying to catch up all at once. And a plan B is to keep a simple water routine tied to meals and medications. Also notice whether the color change comes with burning, strong odor, cloudiness, or a clear drop in frequency, because those details change how seriously it should be taken. And if urine is persistently dark, tea-colored, painful, or paired with swelling or weakness, that is a good reason to speak with a clinician. This sign matters because it reminds you that the body speaks through ordinary routines, not only through dramatic symptoms. Some of the most useful warnings appear in places people barely think to look, which is why quiet body awareness can be more powerful than people expect. The goal is not to monitor every little thing with worry, but to notice when small changes begin repeating in a way that forms a pattern. And once fluid balance starts leaving clues, the next sign often shows up in the muscles themselves, especially at night, when the legs suddenly tighten or cramp without much warning. That is another symptom people normalize too quickly, even though it can reveal more than simple overuse. When your legs cramp or tighten suddenly at night, you are asleep, the house is quiet, and suddenly you wake up with a sharp tightening in your calf or foot that forces you to sit up or grab your leg until it passes. It can feel intense for a few seconds, or even longer, and once it releases, you are left wondering why it happened at all. Many people call it a random cramp, stretch the muscle, and go back to bed without giving it much thought. But when nighttime cramps begin to repeat, especially in the same areas, the body may be signaling something about circulation, hydration, or nerve balance. And those signals often appear at night because that is when the body is no longer distracted by movement. Muscles depend on a steady supply of fluids, minerals, oxygen, and nerve signals to contract and relax smoothly. When that balance shifts, even slightly, the muscle can become more prone to sudden tightening, especially after long periods of stillness. That is why cramps often show up during sleep, when circulation slows and the muscles are not actively being used. A simple way to think about it is like a system that has just enough to function during the day, but not quite enough to stay stable when everything slows down. And after 60, small imbalances in hydration, electrolytes, or circulation can show up more clearly in moments like these. What matters is not just that a cramp happens once, because that can occur for many harmless reasons. The real question is whether it is becoming more frequent, more intense, or affecting the same muscle groups repeatedly. Do you notice it more after days when you drank less water, sat longer, or were more physically active than usual? A common mistake is to treat cramps as isolated events instead of patterns. But the signal behind the signal is consistency. Because repeated tightening often reflects something the body is struggling to regulate smoothly. So, for today, gently stretch the muscle when it happens, but do not stop there. Start observing what may be contributing to it. For this week, pay attention to your fluid intake, especially earlier in the day, and notice whether your legs feel heavier, tighter, or more fatigued before bedtime. A practical plan, A, is to include light movement or stretching before sleep, and a plan B is to adjust your sitting patterns during the day to avoid long periods without circulation. Also notice if cramps come with tingling, weakness, or persistent discomfort even after they pass. And if they become frequent, severe, or start interfering with your sleep regularly, that is worth discussing with a clinician. This is one of those signs that people often minimize because it comes and goes quickly. But the body rarely repeats the same signal without a reason. Nighttime symptoms, especially in the muscles, often reflect what the body has been trying to manage all day without showing it clearly. And once you begin to notice how your muscles behave at night, the next sign often becomes easier to understand, because it shows up during the day in a way that affects how steady and confident you feel while moving. And that shift, even if subtle, can change how safe your movements feel without you fully realizing why. When your balance feels just a little less trustworthy than before, you are walking through the kitchen, turning in the hallway, or stepping off a curb, and for a brief second you feel less steady than you used to, not enough to fall, but enough to notice. Sometimes it shows up as hesitation, sometimes as a wider stance, and sometimes as that quiet instinct to reach for a wall, a counter, or the back of a chair. Because nothing dramatic happens, many people brush it off and simply adjust without ever naming the change out loud. But when balance starts feeling a little less automatic, the body may be revealing a combination of shifts in strength, circulation, nerve feedback, vision, and confidence. And after 60, those small adjustments often begin long before a person would ever describe themselves as unsteady. Balance is not one skill living in one place. It is a live conversation between the feet, the legs, the inner ear, the eyes, the joints, and the brain. If one part of that system becomes slightly slower, weaker, less coordinated, or less reliable, the body can still keep you upright, but it may do so with more tension and less ease. That is why balance changes often feel subtle at first, because the body compensates beautifully until the margin of safety gets a little thinner. A useful way to picture it is like carrying a tray with one hand just slightly weaker than the other, because the tray stays up, but the effort feels less relaxed. And that quieter effort is often what people notice before they ever notice a true loss of stability. The important thing is not whether you ever wobble, because everyone does from time to time, but whether you have started trusting your body less during very ordinary movement. Do you turn more carefully, avoid walking in the dark, or take stairs with more caution, even when nothing specific happened to cause it? A common mistake is assuming balance only matters once falls begin, when in reality, the earlier sign is often reduced confidence and small protective behaviors. But the signal behind the signal is adaptation. Because when your body starts making tiny defensive choices all day, it is usually responding to something real. And that is why noticing this early is valuable, since understanding the pattern now can help you protect mobility later, which is exactly the kind of practical awareness people tend to appreciate and stay around for. So this week, notice when you feel less steady, whether it happens while turning, standing up, walking on uneven ground, or moving at night when you are slightly tired. Pay attention to whether the feeling improves with better lighting, slower movement, supportive shoes, or simply giving yourself an extra second before changing direction. A practical plan A is to keep pathways clear, use stable footwear, and practice slow, controlled turns instead of quick pivots that surprise the body. A useful plan B is to do gentle support-based movement near a counter or chair, just enough to rebuild confidence without forcing anything. And if you feel repeated near falls, new weakness, numbness, or dizziness, along with balance changes, that is a wise time to bring it to a clinician. What makes this sign so important is that balance often reflects the whole system, not just the legs, which means it can quietly summarize many of the body changes we have been talking about. When energy, circulation, muscle response, hydration, and timing are all slightly off, steadiness is often where those issues finally begin working together in a visible way. That does not mean you should be afraid of movement. It means you should become more intentional about how you read your body while you still have room to strengthen what matters. And once confidence in movement starts shifting, the next sign often appears in a place people rarely connect to the rest of the pattern: in the mind itself, as focus becomes a little harder to hold. That change can seem unrelated at first, but very often it is part of the same, larger conversation. When your focus starts slipping in small but noticeable ways, you walk into a room and pause for a second, trying to remember why you went there, or you lose track of a conversation thread more easily than before. Sometimes it shows up while reading, where your eyes move forward but your mind needs to go back and catch what you just missed. It is not a complete loss of memory, and that is exactly why many people ignore it or joke about it instead of observing it more closely. But when focus becomes slightly less steady, especially alongside physical changes, the body may be reflecting something broader than just memory alone. And after 60, mental clarity is often more connected to physical patterns than most people expect. The brain depends heavily on consistent blood flow, oxygen delivery, hydration, and stable energy levels to maintain sharp attention. If any of those systems become less efficient, even in subtle ways, focus can start to feel more fragile, especially during longer tasks or late in the day. That is why concentration is not just about the brain itself, but about how well the whole body is supporting it moment to moment. A simple way to picture it is like trying to keep a light steady when the power supply is fluctuating slightly, because the light still works, but it is not as stable. And in older adults, small shifts in circulation, sleep quality, or energy balance can show up first as mental drift rather than physical discomfort. What matters here is not occasional forgetfulness, because that happens at every age, but whether your attention feels less reliable in situations that used to feel easy. Do you lose track more quickly, feel mentally tired sooner, or struggle to stay engaged in tasks that once held your focus without effort? A common mistake is assuming that this is purely cognitive decline, without looking at the body systems that support clarity. But the signal behind the signal is integration. Because when physical systems become slightly less efficient, the brain is often one of the first places where it shows up quietly. And that is why this kind of change deserves calm attention, rather than immediate fear or dismissal. So, for today, simply notice when your focus fades, whether it is after meals, during long periods of sitting, late in the afternoon, or when you are slightly dehydrated or tired. For this week, observe whether your clarity improves with movement, better hydration, improved sleep timing, or more consistent eating patterns. A practical plan A is to break tasks into smaller blocks and give your brain short resets. And a plan B is to support your body first, because mental clarity often follows physical support. Also pay attention to whether confusion appears suddenly, worsens quickly, or comes with dizziness, weakness, or speech changes. And if those more intense patterns show up, that is a situation where medical evaluation should not be delayed. This kind of shift can feel unsettling, but it does not mean something irreversible is happening. Very often, it is the body asking for steadier support across systems that have been compensating quietly for some time. When you begin to connect physical patterns with mental clarity, the situation becomes much more understandable and manageable. And once you see that connection, the final step becomes much clearer. Because it is not about one symptom, but about how to organize everything you have noticed into something practical. That is exactly what we are going to do next, bringing all these signals into a simple way to respond without overwhelm. If this video helped you, the next one might reveal something important about your body. Take a moment to watch it now. You may notice something you've been ignoring.